Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlawn Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlawn Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. I'm Alan Miller, and I'll be hosting Dane Smith, who returns to us from Growth and Justice, probably one of the most recognizable and esteemed names in journalism, not only in the Midwest, but throughout the annals of journalism. Dane is just an extraordinary writer and a man of conscience, and it's always great to have him here with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, and shucks.
There are so many things for us to talk about since the last time you've been here. Mm-hmm. We could talk about really, well, let's talk about, you mentioned the front page of today's Star Tribune.
Yeah.
We are back as number 16 with the worst traffic congestion in the country. And
Right.
as a person who teaches in Minneapolis and lives in Eagan,
Mm-hmm.
I can attest for that 3 days a week
Yes.
where I crawl home.
It's interesting that you mentioned that word 3 days, because this latest report shows that the average commuter in the Twin Cities wastes 24 hours a year in needless traffic delay. So that's 3 days right there, and that's not good for the economy. And the congestion is really increased dramatically, 13% in the last year. We have a state that is roaring to life economically, and unless we provide the transportation for that economy to function better, we're not going to compete.
And the fact of the matter is, when we have a year like this year with the extraordinary amount of snow, you can double or triple whatever the delays were, because
Right.
it's just been horrendous.
Yeah, it's badly in need of public investment. And we know there is broad consensus on this, Alan, that we have to put more resources into transportation in this state, in this region, and in the Twin Cities. One of the most serious bottlenecks in the nation is that north-south route that goes right from Eagan, from these bedroom communities in Dakota County, to Minneapolis. That is one of the most serious bottlenecks in the nation.
And we're talking about 35.
35.
Right.
Right, 35W. But more than that, we need transit. We're just getting started on our light rail system. The cities with which we compete, mid-sized cities in the middle of the country like Dallas and Denver and Salt Lake City, are all building their transit systems out like gangbusters. They are really adding spokes and building out good, solid transit systems with light rail and bus and every other conveyance that's in the toolkit for transit. And our business community is leading the cry for more investment in transit and transportation, and that's front and center for this legislature. It's not a top priority for either the governor or the minority caucuses or the majority caucuses, but we're trying to push it to the forefront.
And of course, you always get the hue and cry of the cost. But
Right.
the fact of the matter is, that if you don't spend the money, you're going to fall behind. And if you fall behind, you lose some of the corporate and big business clients that you
Right.
have.
And you'll have to
lose some business.
Right, and you'll have to spend the money eventually anyway, when the costs will only rise for construction. The cost for both labor and materials is always on the rise, and right now it's pretty reasonable. So in order to stay competitive, we really need to invest in transportation. There's a package in front of the legislature backed by a coalition called MoveMin.org, M-O-V-E, capital M, capital N.org is where you can find it. I really encourage folks to check it out, get behind this proposal. It does raise taxes. It raises a tax on wholesale fuel, not at the pump, but by the wholesalers, and of course some of that will be passed on to those of us who buy the gas, but it goes right into transportation. Another mechanism that will free up this funding is an increase in the metro sales tax from 1/4 of a cent to 1 cent. And that will help provide the transit that we need. But this bill provides transportation throughout Minnesota, not just the region. Our rural and greater Minnesota roads and highways need improvement.
Just as they need to be brought into the internet much more effectively, and they're not.
Right.
We have to bring them into today's world and not keep them as an 18th century establishment.
Another Star Tribune headline this last week, and you just referred to it, is 500,000 homes in Minnesota, and there are probably, 2 million households, maybe more than that, maybe 2.5 million households. But 500,000 homes are without any kind of access to broadband internet. And that is also a competitiveness issue. Unless you can connect high speed on the internet, it's hard to do business. It's hard to function these days. That is getting to be a necessity, and we need public investment to provide a lot of that.
20%, 25% of our population really without the tools
to compete in this economy.
They have to compete. And now competitiveness is something you wanted to talk about. And
yeah, I think that as we look for that single theme or that single word in any particular time to unite us as voters and citizens, and in our effort to make a more perfect democracy and a better society, I think that word competitiveness really is a great word. It's been used too often in a very narrow sense to mean cutting taxes, cutting regulation, getting labor costs as cheap as we can get them. And that's way too narrow a definition. I think moderates and progressives can reclaim the word competitiveness in the writ larger and wiser around the idea that we need a first-rate workforce, and that requires investment. Early childhood education, starting with early childhood, and improving those scores and those attainments, and getting more of our young people with the workforce training they need.
And getting also a high quality of educators in the state. Now, there was a time when we had a lot more science leaders at the University of Minnesota, and quite a few of them have left where they got better offers and better facilities elsewhere. That certainly takes away from our standing in the world as well as in the nation. We can't let that happen. We've got to keep those people here. It's not just football teams and basketball teams.
Exactly.
It's people who are leaders in the scientific and educational communities.
Excellent point. Excellent point. The competitiveness under the label of competitiveness, we were told that we had to outsource jobs and reduce pay and benefits for workers. We're told we had to cut our government services, our economic security like Medicaid and Social Security, that we had to treat our governments, our own good governments, as if they were beasts. That word was often used, as if they were a foreign, some sort of enemy instead of our instrument. So we cut government and we reduced labor costs, and it hasn't paid off. The vast number of people in this country who are not in the top tier of income have lost ground, and it's just not paying off.
The top 2% earns, I think, 49% of the income, which leaves 98% of us, you know, put you
treading
in there
water
with the rest of us.
Treading water or starting to go
actually,
under. Yeah.
if you phase in inflation, salaries for most middle-class people have gone down
Right, the
in
average,
the last 10 years.
Yes, the hourly wage has declined significantly. And so that's why the minimum wage legislation, which will put $500 million of purchasing power into the working families of this state, is also a great tool for increasing our competitiveness. A state economy where the demand for goods and services increases is going to be good for business. So that fits under competitiveness.
It's going to create more jobs.
Absolutely.
And if it creates more jobs, it lowers unemployment.
Right.
So, I mean, these things dovetail into each other.
They do.
If you use logic and you don't use really rhetoric and hysteria.
Right.
Because every time I hear people say, well, we've got to cut the size of government, we've got to sink it and drown it in the bathtub.
That's right.
Things like that. That they are great sound bites.
Right.
But let's not be foxy about it.
That's right. Well, Republicans and Democrats and independents in this great state over many, many decades, over a century and a half of statehood, have really put us on the map as a state that invests in its own people and its physical infrastructure. It was the government that built the locks and dams that created the milling industry in Minneapolis. Let's not forget that. It was public investment that helped build one of the smartest workforces in the nation. Floyd B. Olson raised the income tax, put that into public education. We had just about the best public education system in the country by the 1940s and 1950s.
And we don't today.
And I would argue that we're still competitive, but it's slipped, and we need to reinvest in that. And Minnesota is usually innovative out front in science, in business innovation. But also, we are competitively innovative and have been for a long time in the way we do things. And so Minnesota was first with a metropolitan council and metropolitan governance. And we were first with innovation in education, allowing parents the choice to send their kids to the public school that they wanted to within a district, for instance. So we can do it again. I think we can bring a sense of innovation and inventiveness and competitiveness to our state. I think we're already making progress. One of the most encouraging things is the recent numbers that show all these efforts, all this anxiety and work that we've been applying to our schools to get test scores up and to reduce the gap between communities of color and white kids.
And it's
that's
starting
beginning to work.
off.
It's beginning,
Yes.
starting to pay off, and that is so encouraging.
Well, there's a reason that I think it's 19 of the top Fortune 500 corporations are headquartered here. And that reason is that we have been able to serve their needs here.
Right.
But we have to continue and make progress and move forward, because there are always people competing out there with us, talking of competitiveness, that will make them a better offer. And we don't want that to happen. We can't afford to have that happen. Minimum wage, to me, I don't see how anybody can oppose less than $10 an hour. And I know even the bills in the legislature now are less than $10 an hour. $10 an hour, $400 a week, from which your taxes are taken out. How in this time in this world can you support a family? Can you meet your obligations on that amount of money?
You know what $10 an hour is in a year? It's $22,000. I mean, that is ridiculous. You cannot raise a family. You can barely survive on $22,000 a year. And
you need a car to get around because public transportation is not that good. You're paying $3.50 a gallon for gas.
Right. Most people
plus
pay
your car.
Most people, if you have if you have a household at all, 2 or 3 members in the family, you need at least $1,000 a year to pay for housing, rent, and whatever utilities. That's $12,000 right there. I mean, most people get it when you say $22,000 a year, and many people are trying to support their families on that amount of money, and it's and right now the minimum wage is about 2/3 that level. So right now the minimum wage is something around $14,000.
Which is why people are working 2 jobs, where or members of the family each have to have a job.
Right.
Just to make really the minimum to exist.
I think the best point for the minimum wage is actually an argument that is at its essence profoundly conservative. America has always prided itself on its work ethic, the Puritan work ethic. You know, from our founding, we were the people who were willing to come here with nothing, work hard, get ahead, work. It's almost a little overdone, I think. There is more to life than work. But nevertheless, it is a profoundly conservative idea that we value work. Why would you work people full-time and not pay them enough to escape poverty? Where is the incentive there to work?
You value work but not the worker. That makes no sense at all.
Right. So we really need, it's a work ethic principle to make sure that people who are willing to do what the American promise holds out, and that is work full time, that by so doing you will have enough to live at least a lower middle class existence. It needs to happen, and it will. It looks very certain that we'll have it. Now the question is, do we include a price, an inflator, an automatic inflation mechanism for the minimum wage? I think that's a good idea too, but it may not happen.
It looks like Senator Bach is going to shoot that down.
Right. Meanwhile, the other 2 elements are those that we talked about. I think we really need to advance education funding. The package that I described to you raises about $700 million a year. And another really important one is early childhood education. We got a great start last year, but and basically this early childhood education funds high quality education for low income folks,
and
their kids.
Proven to pay
pays
itself
off big
back
time.
Like 12-1 or something, according to Art Rolnick.
Pays off big time, at least 10-1, by some studies 16-1. It reduces incarceration in later years. It increases productivity. Kids who have this good start in brain development start to do better in school immediately. They cost us less in the long run. They have better lives, and so that funding that we started last year is good. It's a great start. It's way overdue, and 90% of the families who need it can't get it under the current funding level. So only 10% of the families that could use that high quality early childhood scholarship money, what did I say, 10%? About 90% are not getting it.
Yeah. Another thing we haven't talked about, which is really vitally important, is health care.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because the Congress yesterday voted for the 50th time to repeal the Affordable Care Act.
Or the House did, yes.
And right. And what's the expression? If you do the same thing over and over and it's fruitless.
It's the definition of insanity.
That's
right?
what I thought. Yeah. That's.
Yeah.
I mean, that tells you something about some of the mindset in the Congress. The fact of the matter is, the Affordable Care Act rolled out terribly, had all sorts of problems. Well, as I read some material. Social Security didn't exactly
Right.
roll out flawlessly. Medicare didn't exactly roll out flawlessly. And this was a very ambitious thing. Ambitious only to try to bring us competitive with all the other industrialized countries of the world.
Right.
And yet we have people who are railing against it when it can only improve the lives of everybody.
It actually has improved the lives of millions of Americans already. I know a couple of people personally who are now covered, who were not covered because of this legislation. And yeah, the numbers are a little disappointing. I read a fascinating piece about the rollout of Social Security. In the first few months, as they were trying to implement the program in the 30s, the Roosevelt administration, some of their top people came to him and said, "We can't do this."
Yeah, they wanted to scrap it.
They wanted to scrap it. It couldn't be done. They couldn't find people. There were so many people named Smith, like me, and there was no way to differentiate them because they didn't have Social Security numbers.
And or Miller, like me, which
Right.
is the sixth most common
Right,
name.
and they were completely mystified about how they were going to implement the program, but they did, and it's one of the most important economic security measures that we have in this country. It's a lifesaver for Americans. It reduced our elderly poverty rate from something around 30 to 40% down to, we have a lower poverty rate for elderly people than we do for any other demographic group. It was an astonishing success. And it was a big government program that a lot of people said wouldn't work, couldn't work, would turn us into a socialist nation,
It's
destroy us economically.
Government handout.
That's right.
It's like people opposing the SNAP program.
Right.
And interestingly enough, I found that a good number of people who are getting food stamps are members of the armed forces because they don't make enough money to qualify in any other way. So they have to rely on food stamps. We have people in Congress who are fighting, giving
Right.
veterans benefits to people who put their life on the line and fighting to give them food stamps when
Right.
it's a way of sustenance for them.
Many or most people on food stamps are working. They are not deadbeats. They are working. So, yeah,
They're not the
these
47% that is living on the government.
takers and makers, they try to divide us into, but
Yeah.
we all know it's not true. All of us at some point in our life are makers, and at other points in our life we are takers, and it's a human condition.
Sometime with Social Security, what you're taking is from what you were making.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's really paying you back your own money. That's what people don't seem to understand.
And some people die early and never take what they make, or never make what they, well, they don't get back what they put in.
Yeah.
Right. So it's yeah, these issues are really properly, I think, again, to return to the theme here, understood as a competitiveness issue. That all of the successful, healthy, wealthy nations of the world have these governmental economic security systems in place. It's as simple as the idea as the social contract, which John Locke and Rousseau, the great philosophers who inspired our own revolution, talked about, that there is an obligation for everyone to pay into the social contract, and the return that they get for it is an evenly healthy society that allows business to prosper. The least successful societies are the ones with the smallest government in the world today.
And, you know, you look back really at when Reagan took over, what the income tax base was then, and how it has been really, really diminished to favor the wealthiest corporations, some of which don't pay any income tax, individuals, some of whom pay very little income tax compared to what the middle class pays. And it's a very unfair structure.
Well, it certainly is less progressive than it used to be. In the 50s and 60s and 70s, in the 70s, we reached a a level of economic equality in this nation that was unprecedented. We had a more equal distribution of income and wealth than at any time in our history, and we've steadily fallen away from that equality that we reached in the mid-70s. And I think most people would look back on the 70s and 60s as the good old days, a time when your average, your most jobs paid enough for a family to have a good life, savings. There were excellent pension programs in the private sector. Those are mostly gone now. Good benefits at a job security. A job security was so much better in those days. If you had a job with a good company and a large company, you were likely to have it for life. And so the economy has changed in some ways, not all of them bad. The economy is more dynamic and quick moving, and there's a lot more emphasis on entrepreneurship and innovation and technology. And of course, because of its the global competition that we face, that has put downward pressure on labor. It's a tricky thing. You know, a lot of this global trade that has been going on and the globalization of the economy has been good for poorer nations around the world. There's more equality between the richest and poorest nations, but within the nations,
But we shouldn't
there's more
punish our
inequality.
own middle class because of that.
Every nation in the industrialized world is facing this rising inequality. So it's worse in the United States for various political reasons, but every other nation is facing it to some extent, and it'll be the story of our next century, is how we equalize our economies.
And our next century is now.
That's right. We're well into it.
We're living in our next century.
Yeah.
And we're talking with Dane Smith, the president of Growth and Justice. And you can certainly see his articles, which appear frequently in the Star Tribune, for which he worked many years, and the Pioneer Press, for which he worked many years. And he's written books, wrote a wonderful book about Paul Wellstone. And on the seventh day, perhaps he rests. I don't know.
Thank you, Alan.
And, a welcome guest. And any final thoughts in the half minute that we have left?
Yeah, I think as citizens look forward to this legislature and then the ensuing election, they ought to keep their eye on one statistic, and you could look it up if you want to. It's Minnesota Management and Budget page is called "The Price of Government." You could just Google "Price of Government in Minnesota." I always draw people's attention to this statistic because it is a bottom line.
And we have reached our bottom line here.
And the bottom line is this, that the price of our government in Minnesota is actually lower than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's about at an all-time low, and we can afford to invest more in transportation, early childhood, and
Dane
more
Smith,
equality.
Thank you as always.
Thank you, Alan.